Welcome back, everybody. In this video, our focus is going to be lesson number 45. And in lesson number 45, we are playing the same notes we played in lesson number 44. The only difference is we are playing these notes as chords now instead of arpeggios. Now, before we get into lesson 45, I do want to go back to lesson 44 very briefly. There was something I did forget to mention. In lesson 44, there were two voices. There was a voice on top and a voice on the bottom. The top voice played all of the eighth note triplets, and the bottom voice obviously played the notes in the bass. The first note of every measure had a half note that had a stem going down and a stem going up. So that is called a unison. So the bottom voice is playing, in lesson 44, it was playing C. The top voice was also playing a C, and that's why there was a stem going up and a stem going down. Because when you see that, technically there are two voices that are singing the same note, or in this case two voices or two parts, the top voice, bottom voice. The reason it's notated as a half note is because it has to, the larger note value has to take precedence over the shorter note value. So if that were a quarter note, you'd have to stop it after those eighth note, the first group of eighth note triplets. But you need it to ring. The composer wants you to let it ring, so it's notated as a half note. If it were notated as an eighth note triplet, then it would stop at the same time you play the very next note. So the longer note value is going to take precedence when you have a unison note. Okay, so back to lesson 45. Again, we're playing the same notes, only we are playing them as blocked chords or block chords, however you want to say it. This is a term that I was taught, and so I use it fairly regularly in my teachings. So you have, again, a top voice and a bottom voice. The bottom voice, in this example, by the way, in this lesson, oh, no, never mind. It's still in 4/4. The eighth note triplets from the previous lesson are throwing me off. So we are in a time signature of 4/4. The bottom voice is playing a whole note, so that'll ring for 4 counts. The top voice has a quarter rest, which is 1 count of silence, and then you play the same 3 notes on the second, the third, and the 4th count. And you're going to play them I, M, and A together, like this. Only the right notes, right, with the left hand. So you have thumb, and then fingers, fingers, fingers. 1, 2, 3, 4. Excuse me. And then you go on from there. Pretty simple. There isn't, at the end, at the very last measure, we have a new rest value. At the end, you'll see a square that looks very similar to a half rest, but it's not a half rest. This one in particular is a whole rest. And the way you tell the difference is, if you see that square and it's underneath the staff line, the second to the top staff line, that is a whole note. If you see a half rest and it's on top of, I believe it's the middle staff line. If it's resting on top of it, then it's a half rest. And a good way to remember what I had come up with when I was getting confused over the half rest and the whole rest is, a half rest, the rest is filling up half of the space of the staff lines, because it's on the staff lines, it's filling up half of the staff line, a half rest. And a whole rest, it's overflowing. Like, think of a glass that's overflowing. It's that would say full, but it works for me. A whole rest, I imagine, is overflowing, is spilling over, and that would be, and that would mean that the rest square is underneath the staff line because it's going over and it's spilling over. Half rest, whole rest. This whole rest is 4 counts, so you count 1, 2, 3, 4. Same duration as a whole note. And that's it. All the chords are the same. Everything else should be pretty basic. One last thing. When you play the bass notes, if you're changing strings, make sure that you use your thumb to stop. Excuse me. Make sure that you use your thumb to stop the strings that need to be stopped. The important one, the big one, is going to be the 4th string. So you play the 4th string, you're going to have to play the 5th string. You're going to stop the 4th string with your thumb by playing a rest stroke on the 5th string. See that? It stopped. Show you again. We go over that. We went over that in a couple of previous lessons. One last thing. When you go to the next measure, I want you to plant your fingers onto the strings that you're playing so that you can play the quarter rest at the beginning of each measure. So for example, the first measure, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1. My fingers are stopping the strings I was playing, and that's going to be that quarter rest. So it's kind of like you're just preparing a count early, which is doing 2 things. You're making sure that you're going to be playing the right strings, right? And you're indirectly playing that quarter rest at the beginning of each measure. On my count, 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Stop. And there you have lesson 45. I'll see all of you in lesson 46.